if you were to have a lawsuit against yourself in the United States, you don't have to renounce your U.S. citizenship and move to Portugal. I personally have lived in quite a few places within the United States. I've spent time living in the South. I currently live in Texas. I've lived in the Northeast and the Midwest. I think I've lived in maybe 4 or 5 of the top 10 largest countries in the United States. And every state, every location, every jurisdiction has different advantages that other ones don't, whether it's cost of living, lifestyle, cultural, social, different things, fiscal issues. There's a variety of different things to consider. I am a big fan of a few different video channels on YouTube that discuss different jurisdictions where to live. And most of them are focused actually on living abroad and are often focused on U.S. citizens who might want to renounce their U.S. citizenship or maybe establish residency in a different country. One of them being Nomad Capitalists, which I think is a really, really interesting channel, and I like the work that they do. Not that I necessarily agree with any of it, not that I necessarily disagree with any of it, but it's just super interesting. And I have a client right now that not originally from the US and doesn't have citizenship here, and I work with a lot of clients like that. But one of the conversations that we had was around this idea, for tax planning purposes, what might make sense for them, whether to stay here in the US or maybe go to a different country, maybe go back to where they have citizenship. So one of the things that Nomad Capitalist talks about is whether or not you should move to Texas or Florida, because so many people are moving from Texas to Texas and Florida from these high cost of living states such as New York and New Jersey and California and elsewhere. And Nomad Capitalist makes a really good point. If you're willing to move 1,000 miles or 2,000 miles across the country, why not consider another jurisdiction that could possibly be abroad? And so I think that's a valid point. And what I've realized is that it's not realistic for everyone to make that consideration. But for some people, it probably could make a lot of sense. Now, whether you go and you live abroad and you don't renounce your U.S. citizenship and you continue to own assets here, whether a U.S. citizen or not a U.S. citizen, there's still estate tax issues that come along with that. And that's something that I don't hear them necessarily talk about a lot, though they might. So what happens if you can't move to Belize or Mexico or Colombia or Singapore or Ireland or Portugal? Portugal is really hot these days. And there's even an asset protection aspect of having passports from other countries or establishing residency in other countries. So what do you do when you can't move to Florida or Texas, where I'm located? And you still have options. There's still tax planning options. There's still asset protection options. And so what you do is you consider trust planning in one of these jurisdictions that has extremely advantageous, from a tax perspective and asset protection perspective, very advantageous trust laws. And so we help a lot of clients with this type of planning in South Dakota, Nevada being another place where you can do it. What's unique about South Dakota that doesn't happen in Nevada is privacy. There's heightened great privacy laws when it comes to trust planning in South Dakota. But two things that really stand out is this ability to set up, I myself could set up for my own benefit what's called a domestic asset protection trust in South Dakota. And protect all of my assets from any type of personal claims that come against me. So that's one aspect of it, right? You don't need to, if you were to have a lawsuit against yourself in the United States, you don't have to renounce your U.S. citizenship and move to Portugal, which some attorneys may advise you on. There's better planning out there. You just have to be really proactive. The other aspect that's really overlooked And one of the things to keep in mind, reasons that people move to Florida and Florida and Texas from California, New York, New Jersey, elsewhere, is to avoid state income tax. There's no state income tax in Florida or Texas, whereas California has nearly a 14% state income tax rate for its top earners. So you can never really do anything with your W-2 salary wages, but you do have planning opportunity around whether or not you're selling a business or you have maybe large investment brokerage accounts and you have a lot of capital gains that you're dealing with. So you can avoid state income tax on those transactions if you are to move your assets, your closely held business interests or your brokerage accounts to a irrevocable trust in South Dakota. And so there's different ways to structure that, and why this is such a beautiful thing or an opportunity for people in these various states is that even though it's an irrevocable trust that you potentially benefit from, you can still set it up in a way that allows for a directed trust where you yourself are still managing those assets. You're still benefiting from those assets, even though you have a trustee that is responsible for any claims that come against that trust. So I'll have different videos about directed trust, but essentially you bifurcate, you split up, you part and parcel all of these various responsibilities that have historically existed with the trustee. So the trustee no longer is in charge of managing your assets. You can even, so you, the client, can be designated as the investment advisor. You're in charge of managing the assets. That's the role given by South Dakota law. You can have a distribution advisor. It could be a family member, it could be a friend, it could be a trust company who is the one who decides when to make distributions to you. And then lastly, you have an administrative trustee who just does the back office function of, whether it's reporting, putting together financial statements or tax documents, that kind of thing. So you don't have to move abroad. You don't have to move to Texas or Florida, but you can still tap into significant tax savings if you can't make that jump across the country or even abroad.